I am glad to see a big group. Joe, of course, has a lot more expertise than I do. He probably would have used a PowerPoint. I'm not a PowerPoint guy, but at least I guess you'll be seeing some PowerPoints later on anyway, so maybe it's just as well that I don't use a PowerPoint. But the map there, I don't know, you all did get the useful links sheet. Now that useful link sheet, if you don't have one, we have more copies here. These are all very helpful in just getting online to getting information that is of interest to you. And if you will notice, 5 lines down, the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, the tree health page, and then you see iowatreepest.com. Now that's what this website is. It's iowatreepest.com, all one word. Joe, I did have a good email conversation with Joe yesterday, just to make sure I was confirming some things that I thought that I knew, and I wanted to make sure that he confirmed them. Well, he did mention that for the emerald ash borer and other tree pests in Iowa, this is the best website. It's designed for you to compare. If you think you have an emerald ash borer problem, this is a site that shows other pests that may be very similar to the emerald ash borer. So just because you see a shiny green beetle certainly does not mean that it is the emerald ash borer, because there are others. And I did have a lot of entomology back in school, but when I say back, it's back quite a ways. A little story I had that was not associated directly with entomology, but at UNI, I took a class called the comparison of the North American vertebrates. Well, I found out that my professor was an ornithologist. So guess what we studied? 90% of the course was birds. So I didn't, really, it didn't make much difference to me because I was still getting the credit. But I found out that, the birds have an interesting part of the entire, world ecosystems. Well, the insects do too, and I found out later that when I took some ornithology that it's amazing, the niche that insects play. And certainly the emerald ash borer, or the EAB, has gotten a bad name, but back in Asia, where it came from, they had no problem with the emerald ash borer. So a lot of you know what invasive species means. A lot of things were introduced to Iowa that they thought was going to be good because it was good back where they came from, but it's not always the case here. So our ash trees are susceptible to the emerald ash borer, and it's mainly the larvae that get into the tree by the adult laying eggs. And it's that vascular cambium that a lot of you have maybe studied, where that's why a tree can be hollow but still have the vascular cambium below the bark and be very healthy. And the larva is what gets into that vascular cambium where the water and the food flow, and that's what they can plug up. And a lot of information that you read, your tree, if you have an ash tree or two that you really enjoy and it's a majestic tree and it provides shade in the summertime, I know we have one that saves a lot of our of the air conditioning bill. because of the placement of where the ash tree is. So you may have an ash tree that you would like to save, and I'll be going into some of the things that you can consider about spending some money, and hopefully you haven't spent any money yet. At least the experts say that until it gets confirmed within 15 miles of your location, don't waste your money, unless you have a lot of money and you just you feel like doing it. I know there's been, and I don't know if any of you were here 2 years ago at Riverview Park when we had this out at Riverview. Okay, well, I was looking at my notes from 2 years ago out at Riverview. February 27th was when I helped Joe Herring out then out at Riverview. And I'm just going to start from where I left you all 2 years ago. And I said, please beware of door-to-door sales treatment in neighborhoods. The closest confirmed infections are Jasper County in Newton, Powesheik County, Grinnell, Story County in Story City, and Blackhawk County of Waterloo, Cedar Falls. They are all further away than 15 miles, so don't waste your money yet. And that's what I said 2 years ago. And guess what? I confirmed with Joe yesterday that as far as he knows and all of the websites from DNR, we're lucky. Or maybe some Marshall County residents are getting lazy and not turning in what they think might be emerald ash borer. So on the website, there is a contact number. They do have at the Iowa State Extension, they have a lab where they can confirm if what you send in or what they come and pick up, they like to get their own samples so they know what they have before they go test it. So that's one of the good news things. Is the last thing that I said here is Marshalltown has experienced some of these high pressure sales people where they have even injected small trees. And this was 2 years ago when I had a good friend who lives here in Marshalltown, that there was a crew going through town, trying to sell people, hey, you got ash trees, you better get them treated. And he said he didn't know an ash tree from a pine tree, but they came in and treated all of his trees. And I don't know how much money that he spent, but he wasn't too happy when I told him that it probably isn't the preferred way to do it. For one reason, depending on the size of the tree, as to whether you are going to treat it one way or another. And indeed, Marshalltown has a lot of ash trees. If you're in the town or if you're around in the surrounding part of Marshall County, we have, like a lot of other counties, a lot of ash trees. A couple years ago, we did a Marshalltown inventory, and some of you in here, helped with inventorying all of the terrace trees in Marshalltown. And as probably many of you know, the trees on your terrace are controlled by the city as far as what you can plant and so forth, because of that limited area and the city having access to some of that area. And so we did an extensive inventory, and so Marshalltown was heads up that way with making sure that we knew what we had, and the trees that are ash trees that Marshalltown may have on the terraces, so they can do a heads up on preparing when, like I said here, my last sentence two years ago, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Well, here 2 years later, and and we're still saying that. That the odds are, and as you see, the map. Do I? Okay, if you want to refresh that, this, and I think I saw a Bob Hibbs a couple weeks ago, and some of you that know Bob Hibbs was the state forester that retired, and Joe Herring, took Bob Hibbs' place. But Bob Hibbs, I said to him, "Are you as surprised as I am that we haven't heard anything new?" And I didn't know whether I had missed anything. And Bob says, "No, I'm with you. I'm as surprised as you are." And this is the same map as 2 years ago. And except I shouldn't say that because there are a few added counties. And one of the things I thought you might like to know as an update is those counties. As you see, Marshall is right there with Tama and Grundy and Hardin County. Those 4 counties are right close to Black Hawk, which Waterloo, Cedar Falls has had emerald ash borer for quite a while, and even down the latest to us was down Newton and Grinnell, Powesheik County. Well, one of the updates on the website that you can go to anytime, the latest county was November 9th of last year, Decatur. So you notice, Decatur is way down south and a little west. Then before that, or after that, was July 27th of last year, was Ringgold County. Now I can't remember right now where Ringgold County is, but I know it's not too close to Marshall. It's okay, yeah. So so Ringgold is down south. Then Butler County was June 29th, and Butler is where? Okay, it's north of Grundy is Butler. So that was last June, and then there were 5 more counties. June 15th, they announced here on the page, they confirmed 5 more counties, and that was in April. We had Fayette and Madison. Now those are quite a ways apart. You Madison down south, and isn't Fayette up? Yeah. So those two, as far apart as they are, were confirmed in April of last year. And then they had, in March of last year, a Greene and Wayne. Again, we're going down south for Wayne. Greene is where? West of Boone. Okay, it's west of Boone. So west of Boone, and then Wayne is way down here on the Missouri border. They were both in March of last year. And then in February, we had Jackson and Clayton counties. So are those very far apart?
Clayton is northeast.
Okay, and where would Jackson be?
I think it's west.
Okay. Oh, so anyway, those were in February of last year, and so those were the ones in 2017, and yet we still have the white there with Marshall and Tama and Grundy kind of being surrounded, and as well as Hardin to a degree. So why isn't it happening faster? Well, when I asked Joe yesterday by email, and by the way, he and his family with his new son are supposed to be coming home as we speak from the hospital. So he does have some other responsibilities right now, which is nice, and I'm glad everything's going well. But he isn't sure. The whole state has been quarantined now for 2 or 3 years, where you aren't, if you are a camper and you like to take your own firewood, if you happen to have some ash, and of course some people don't even know if they have ash or what they have, as long as you keep it within Iowa, if you camp in Iowa, that's fine to take your wood in Iowa, but technically you aren't supposed to go into Missouri or any other state surrounding. But he said that the adult, if they are flying as fast as they can in their usual daily activities, they don't travel much more than 12 to 15 miles in a year by their activities. So that's why I suppose they have caught 15 miles as a number that would work. As to if you don't have it confirmed within 15 miles, then that's the maximum that an adult will usually fly if they want to go anywhere. They do say that a lot of females stay in the same tree their entire life. They don't even go to another tree. So a percentage of females do that. So the one thing that would limit it also is that I guess if people from out of state have been careful in bringing in infested wood, that may be a factor too as to how fast it will spread in Iowa. It originally came over. I guess the one thing that I mentioned two years ago, that it was found in Detroit and Ontario in 2002. So just 16 years ago, and that's the first time it was actually detected in Detroit and Ontario, and it certainly has spread west since then. But as you, I guess it doesn't show the map here, but on a national map, Nebraska is about as far west as they show the EAB spreading that direction. But the crates that were shipped over from Asia, the wood crates, was where they expected how the emerald ash borer got here to the United States from Asia, was in the wood crates. Some people have asked about, well, what does the adult do that might be harmful besides laying the eggs? And that's about it. I mean, the adults will feed on the leaves, but it won't really be of any harm. It's just the larva that's beneath the bark. Now, some of you have heard about the departure hole is a D-shaped. So in the shape of a D, and a lot of the pictures you'll see will show that D-shaped hole, and the galleries are like real curvy S-shaped galleries beneath the bark where the larva has bored. So if you do suspect that you have an ash tree that, hey, it's looking. Now, when we say how it looks, they usually will start in the top of the tree. So if you are starting to see some problems in the top of your ash tree, at least that's one sign. If you see a lot of woodpeckers visiting that area of the tree, and you see a flecking from woodpeckers are looking for those larvae. They can detect something, but it's not a larva that they're familiar with. A lot of woodpeckers, and I've learned this from other biologists, that they are, woodpeckers have a very sensitive way of knowing what kind of larva are they hearing. And so a lot of this flecking is the woodpeckers are trying to find, what is that? And so you will often see woodpecker flecking on the trunk. And if the tree is, part of it has died, if you haven't had more than 40% die off, and it does turn out to be the emerald ash borer, what's, I guess, a good news is that this chemical, and it's still the same chemical that's been out there for at least 3 to 4 years, that's very effective. The name that we usually hear of it is a triage. A triage is still the chemical that is most effective. And what is the good news is they found out that it's almost as effective after the tree is infected as well as a preventative. So if you have a tree that has less than 40% that has been killed off, it's still not too late to kill those emerald ash borer larvae. Yes, sir.
Can you spell that for me? How do you spell that? Triage.
T-R-E-E-A-G-E, and I've seen it mainly in 2 words, a triage or age, and that's and the actual name for it. I do have it here for those of you that want to know the actual name. Let's see here. It's amamectin benzoate. So that's the active ingredient, and they call it a triage. And yeah, they just have capital T-R-E-E, a capital A-G-E with a dash in between the 2 words. That's what they have here. Now, the other big factor is the size of your ash tree. If you have an ash tree that's less than 25 inches in diameter at what they call a breast height, then if it's less than that, then they say you can treat it without injecting. But if you have a big ash tree like I do, that's about like that in diameter out in my front yard, it's a beautiful tree, but that will have to be injected. So 25 inches or larger in diameter, it has to be commercially done. And as far as I know, I still don't think there's any company in Marshall County that's doing it. I know 2 years ago when I looked into it, Des Moines had several commercial companies, and they've been advertising, as some of you have probably heard. But the injection is very effective, and I don't know the details on how many injections you would have on a 25-inch tree. But the good, yes?
Can't remember the name of I think it was a home show last year. One of the local pest control companies.
And they are doing it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's...
He said it was one of the 2-year injections.
Yes, and that's one of the good news is injection, you only have to do it every other year. So it's effective for 2 years. The downside of starting too early, like if you say, hey, I've got the money, I'm going to start injecting my trees now. Well, every time you inject, there's always that slim chance of infection. So I guess that's the downside that I've read in some of the materials is, trees can get infected, and so don't, inject unless you are needing to, and that's fine. But so that's the downside of maybe starting years before you really need to. And of course, because it's effective, the infection may have been in the tree for 4 or 5 years before we really notice it. And so if you would have been injecting all of those years, you just subject your tree to a slim chance of infection. Am I beyond the time here, Gary? I just wanted to make sure that you are all aware of don't spend your money yet, because we still haven't gotten the word that it's within 15 miles. Unless you live in southern Marshall County, then as on the map, or on the map that I have, it shows a circle, for the radius of your 15 miles. So if you live in southern Marshall County, then that's in the zone of 15 miles from Newton or from Grinnell. So I think that's one, good news, is that it's certainly not too late. In fact, we don't know yet what too late's going to be for Marshall County. So those are the main things that I wanted to say. Oh, and when Terry Gray had me go to Des Moines for the all-state workshop, this was in an area, I don't know whether some of you are familiar with the Urbandale on Douglas. There's what they call the Walker-Johnston Park. There's a park with an elementary school as a part of that park, and that's where they had noticed, besides us having the meeting there in the shelter house, they had a report that all of the ash trees were dead now in that Johnston Park except one. And they were wondering, why is that one tree still healthy? Well, guess what? It was right next to the elementary school. And guess what one of the elementary teachers had the kids do for a project? They wanted to treat that ash tree with over-the-counter at Earl May. They had I don't know whether it was a solution or probably powder that they mixed, but they went by the directions, and it was what they call a soil soak. Now, we can soil soak, but all the other, there is a soil injection that needs to be by commercial, and there is a bark drench that needs to be commercial. But these kids just took the over-the-counter Earl May powder and mixed it up and treated that tree, and as far as the experts could tell, that's the only reason why that was the ash tree that survived. So there are some chemicals, especially if you have a small ash tree that you want to continue to survive, then that might be an idea that a small ash tree can be treated by yourself. So.
But you can still wait until you have symptoms.
Well, probably, because I know Des Moines had it a long time ago, so that's why these school kids knew, the teacher knew that, hey, it's going to come, and because it's already in Des Moines, and by golly, it worked. At least it appears to. So, if there's any other questions, fine, and if not, I'll turn it back to Gary. Yes.
How, without an ash borer coming to affect your tree, say your big huge one, how long could that tree live under ideal circumstances?
Well, Mr. Horticulturist, an ash tree can live up to.
Oh, probably 50 years anyway.
So one that's the size of his, like you have
Yeah.
no idea how old that
Well,
tree is?
we bought the house in '76, and in '76, that tree was about like that, and it still had some tie downs, from the previous owner in strong winds, and so that had to have been, planted in the house was built in the '60s, so I'm guessing it would have been planted in the late '60s.
Yeah, 68.
So we're talking 50 years now, aren't we?
Yeah.
And I've heard 50, 60 years on ash trees, and so,
In urban settings, usually.
right,
May go longer than that out in
Yeah.
forest situation.
I
Mhm.
got two that are 54, 55.
Yeah.
And they are beautiful trees. Those of you that have ash trees, and we have a seedless ash, so we don't have to mess with all the seeds. But to me, they are a beautiful tree. But if you're trying to replace them, I know hackberry is one of the ones that they talk about. I know there's a whole list that the website has on suggested trees.
Hackberry was a good suggestion to replace the American elm originally.
Yeah.
Some of the habit of growth and the leaf mesh and everything.
Those of you that are old enough to remember a Dutch elm, I was back at UNI then, and the big deal was, hey, hackberry is the replacement tree, even way back, and that would have been in the late 60s when the Dutch elm hit. So, okay, Gary, thank you.
We'll take a brief look at some general tree pruning practices, and I'll start it, and Gary will offer the expert advice here as I go along here. I don't have a little gadget here, so I'm going to have to do this by hand here. Okay, techniques and practices. Okay, a couple general strategies on pruning trees. Sooner and smaller. Prune young and small branches. Better to cut a branch that's an inch or half inch or 3/4 inch or inch and a half, rather than waiting until you get one that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 inches. We've all seen trees that way that around town. If you drive around town and you've seen oaks or maples that they've had a nice sized branch cut down. Okay, that can be avoided if you do it again younger, smaller, rather than later, older trees and larger branches. Yeah, the tree gets bigger down here, and branches don't go higher. Yeah, that's that first one. Urban forest or in backyards are different than a natural forest, because in a natural forest, especially like pine trees, they'll self prune, and even your deciduous ones. But in an open situation, you're likely to have lower branches stay on for a long time. So while we talked about a lot of these things, improved structure, codominant stems, crossing limbs, if they cross each other, disease ones, clearance. All these different things. There's all kinds of reasons. And if you've planted a tree and it's only a few years old and you get some storm damage or deer damage, they bite off the top, you're going to have a codominant start. So it's best to start within that year, cut off one of them so you don't end up with 3 or 4 or 5 inch codominant trunks. So start one early. This is kind of a real bad example over here on the right. This is just damaged limbs, insect damage, physical damage. Certainly can take those off. Clearance, like someone was asking about, lower branches, stop signs, or even just mowing. You can raise that bottom crown a little bit. And again, that's best done if you do it as the tree grows rather than waiting until, unless someone puts a stop sign where there wasn't a stop sign before, and then you've got, got a problem. Now this is something you call someone to do it rather than climb up the tree by yourself. At least I wouldn't. I know pruning apples and peaches and pears for fruit production, that's a whole different ballgame than just your backyard trees. I'm not well up on those. These are some different harmful ones, bad ones here. Like this one right here, cut all the way back to the flesh. Looks nice, but it's not good. Or one that's split. Or the one up on the top left has too much stub left on it. And I say these are all large cuts, so like I say, that's if you cut them small, then they heal better. Tree responses. These are nice healing scars there. Is that right? Yeah. And the older the tree, the slower it is to heal. The younger the tree, the more likely, and the smaller the branch you cut, the more healing growth you'll get. So it's easier to heal over a 1 or 2 inch cut than it is a 6 or 7 or 8 inch cut. 3 cuts to prevent tearing. If you cut a large branch, you're likely to tear it off when it falls. So this is kind of the step-by-step. There's pictures here in just a minute. It's easier to see them in pictures than it is to read it. So that upper left one, you can see a very small little notch, about 1.5 or 2 feet out. That's your first cut. So you cut it on the bottom first. That prevents the tearing. Then on the top right here, you do your main cut. Cut the large branch off, and then you go back and you cut it off close, just off the collar here. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So they call it the 3-cut technique. A small notch underneath to prevent tearing. Then cut your limb a couple feet out, like the bottom left one there, and then go back and cut that little short stub off, and you're less likely to tear bark all the way down the side of the tree. But that's a good cut right there for a large branch. It's damaged. Good structure, again, crossing limbs, limbs that are kind of growing, what we call ingrown limbs. Limbs should grow out that way. Every once in a while you get a wild one that'll kind of grow inside or cross over. They're likely to damage it. We talked about codominant leaders. Again, this is one with those moldable leaders. And ideally, if you can do it with a pruning shears, the 1-inch side, 1/2-inch size, small branches, rather than wait till they get to be 3 or 4 or 5 inches. We talk about over thinning. If you take too many leaves away, then you're reducing the food production ability, the photosynthetic production. So, yeah, that's some kind of a crown thinning. Yeah. So this one you've got. Here's crossing branches right here. You need a pointer, some sort. Yeah. Wind damage. Yeah. If you keep it thinned out so it's not a sail. Yeah. Try to keep the tree from being a sail. Yeah. I have 2 silver maples in my front terrace, and I thin them out every 3 or 4 years. It's worth a few $100s to keep them thinned because they're the only trees out there, and they're prime targets for wind coming from the west. So try to keep them thinned out a little bit. Yeah. So that's true of trees that are not in a forest, because we're dealing with ones in the backyard or front yard where you have trees that are exposed to the wind. And the one on the left shows some of the crossing branches and some of those ingrown ones where the branches are actually curving inward. So cutting those out so they get most of the branches out, letting more light in and more air through easily. This is talking about what not to do. You don't want all your branches on the end. You want some stability down along the base of it. They call it lion tailing. Yeah. So if you had a lot of branches out on the end, more likely to whiplash and split. Yeah. Okay. Crown raising, talked about that. Yeah. Clearance. Yeah. Crown restoration. Yeah, talking about selective use of water sprouts, deadwood. Several prunings rather than doing it all at once is a better way to do it. Yeah. Starvation. Yeah. We talk about taking too much off will starve it. And then sun scalding, especially in the winter. Sometimes, and large stubs don't heal quite as well as small ones do. Weakened limbs. A couple of pictures here in a minute of the. You get some really weird growth on topping a tree. Those witch's brooms kind of appearance. Yeah, I think there's a picture coming up here on one of these. So most of our pruning, your pruning, my pruning is on the small trees. So if it gets to be the one where it's big enough, you need a tree company to come in. That's usually damage. Pruning tools. So this is our style tools. You should be able to do most of your pruning with these things. Loppers and little small saws.
Would you go back a slide?
Sure. No, you're asking a lot of me, aren't you? Okay.
Cuts to a flat surface should be avoided.
Wait a second. You can get 2 kinds of shears. One, the bypass ones where the blades actually go across each other, and then there's other ones where one blade comes down on a flat surface. Safety. Okay, everybody wears all this when you prune. Shields and everything. Anyway, so I have to put that in at the end. Hard hats. So I should have put the first slide in last and say, remember, sooner and smaller rather than larger and later. We had some mild winters, so the Japanese beetles came back in force this summer. And they really went after the lindens. Yeah, I saw a lot of lindens around town. There are a lot of skeleton leaves. Yeah. So we'll have to wait and see if they come back. But yeah, normally there's enough residual leaf there that they'll come back, unless, yeah. Okay, we'll do a little bit on some basic tree planting. And the ground's still too frozen to get out there and do anything today, so. I borrowed this one, this set of slides a couple years ago from Florida. We don't have hurricanes, but they had a good set of illustrations, and I've been sort of customizing it over the years. So I have to give credit where credit is due, so I'm not plagiarizing. So, yeah, this is the two people who put it together. So I have to acknowledge Dr. Gilman and Tracy Parton for at least 3/4 of the slides in this presentation. So, but okay. So this is where I've kind of customized this a little bit. See, if you have a hurricane in Florida, plant another tree. Iowa, whatever else. Tornadoes, thunderstorms, high winds, whatever. So the idea is that when a tree goes down, plant one. Okay, and there's steps here. There's each of these kind of slides repeats it with these 10 different steps. So we'll kind of walk through some of these things. So look for I love this picture here. This one and you'll see a lot of these around town. With the power lines and other things where they've come through and they've just topped it right down the middle of it. So choose a tree that's the size of what's ever underneath your power line. So it doesn't have to be a big maple or big oak. It can be like a serviceberry or linden or hawthorn or something. There's some 10 or 20 foot medium-sized trees or 15-foot ones. So choose your tree and your location. Yeah. Okay. Shallow, wide hole. Wider is better than deeper. Look at this one. So it's not so much how deep it is as the width. They talked about measuring it, the distance between the top of the root ball and the bottom, and digging it just a little bit shorter than that. You want to leave some space for settling, depending on how tight the root ball is. There's a lot of ifs in here. But the idea is that you don't want to dig a deep hole. You want it to be just about the size of the root ball that you're putting in. Wider is better rather than deeper. Yeah, this one's showing as wide as possible. This one shows a very nice wide hole. 1.5 times, I've heard 2 times, 3 times. Kind of depends on the soil type for the loose soil for the new roots. So you want it to be about the depth of the root ball, maybe just a little bit smaller, so settle a little bit, and then dig it wide. And this is on some of the pictures that on the handouts there too. So when you're enthusiastic about digging a hole, don't get so enthusiastic that you're digging deep. Save your energy. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, topmost root and treat root defects. So what you're looking for is what they call the root spread. That's kind of where that should be right at the ground surface, or just maybe a hair above the ground surface. Sometimes you'll buy a potted tree that has 2 or 3 inches of soil right on top of that root spread. So you want to clear that off to find out where that root spread is. Roots breathe, so you don't want a lot of soil on top of the roots. So. Yeah, top moist, the root flare, root spread. So sometimes when you buy one that you have to kind of dig around a little bit to get down to that level. You can see where there's the staining on there where they've had 3 or 4 inches of mulch and soil covering up a lot of that roots. Yeah, they're talking about here, they're kind of showing removing some of the excess off that one. And this is another same picture. Circling roots, it was asking about, you want to cut those off. If they've circled, but leave the nice straight ones on there. I have I don't have a picture of it, but I have a walnut in the back, my backyard that it's about that big around, and when they put the house in, they built up the soil so it's straight down, but it's got about 2 feet of soil on it that I can't dig away. I had to show one picture of one of us at work here, so. This is our annual spring tree planting out, but you can see the encircling roots on this one. This one's been in the pot for quite a while. You can see the size of that tree. That's a good 2.5 inch tree or so. But that's probably been repotted a couple times, and the roots are pretty well wrapped around. So, Yeah, that one's been in there for a few years. So you just, kind of do diagonal slants. So it actually cut through the roots. So it kind of looks kind of rough, but it's actually beneficial to massacre those outer roots. Yeah. This is kind of what they look like a tangle. This is the soil all removed, so you wouldn't want to plant this as this condition, but they dug away all the soil just so you could see the roots and the wrapping around. So this has got a lot of wraparound roots in there. You can see them going sideways. Typically, they should kind of go outwards. Yeah. But things that you can't see. Leaning. You can see a kind of root curving around there. Yeah. If you don't kind of get your tree straightened up again, you're more likely to get circling roots. This is looking at a good size burlapped and wire wrapped one. The point is try not to wiggle the tree trunk in the soil too much. We've never used a truck to do this, but kind of roll them in. But this one's a good size one. So. Disturbing the root ball, what you're disturbing is there's millions what they call root hairs. And these are what absorb the water that come out from the root cells. And there's millions and millions on the tree, on the roots. And if you get too much disturbance of the soil in the root ball, you're going to slow down the recovery and the growth of the tree. So that's kind of so it's what you can't see that's actually you're protecting there. Yeah, this is the one setting the tree in the hole. Yeah, and you can see this one has the exposed roots here, right here, just a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah. Soil to the bottom. Try to avoid being too deep. Yeah, that's the thing. Is because then if you have to add soil, it's going to settle more. So it's nice to have a nice firm bottom of the hole. Yeah. We usually take the shovel. We kind of put it across the hole and the top of the root ball, and it should be leveled. Yeah, right across there. Rather than try to disturb the bottom, like as Gary's saying, just cut away around. So leave the bottom 6 inches or so. Otherwise, you're going to disturb a lot of the soil at the bottom. Oh, that's an old tree that they've dug up that shows a wire basket after, who knows, 20, 30 years or something. Well, thank you for coming and chancing the storm. Yeah, very good. Good.